It was a warm summer night when Luna Park was bustling with thrill-seekers and families enjoying the neon lights and heart-pounding rides. Among them was Emily, a teenager who loved the rush of adrenaline that came with roller coasters. She had convinced her friends to ride the park's newest and most terrifying attraction, the Widow's Peak. The Widow's Peak was a towering, twisted monstrosity of steel and screams. It had only been open for a week, but it had already gained a reputation for being the scariest ride in the park's history. As Emily and her friends approached, they could see the coaster cars whipping through loops and corkscrews, disappearing into the darkness before rocketing out again with ear-piercing shrieks. Emily's friends were nervous, but she was determined. They got in line and waited, the sounds of delighted terror all around them. Finally, it was their turn. Emily and her friends were strapped into their seats, and the coaster began its slow climb up the first massive hill. As they ascended, Emily felt a strange chill, a sense of foreboding she couldn't shake. When they reached the peak, the ride paused for a moment, giving them a breathtaking view of the park below. But as they started to plummet down the first drop, something went horribly wrong. The coaster suddenly jerked to a stop, hanging precariously at an odd angle. The lights flickered and then went out, plunging them into darkness. Panic set in among the riders. Emily's heart pounded as she heard the terrified whispers of her friends. They were stuck, high above the ground, with no idea what was happening. Minutes felt like hours as they waited for help, but none came. Then, a low, eerie sound began to rise from below the tracks, like the wailing of lost souls. Emily strained to see in the darkness. That's when she noticed shadowy figures moving below them, creeping along the support beams of the ride. Her blood ran cold as she realized these weren't park employees. The figures were pale, gaunt, and had hollow eyes that glowed faintly in the dark. Suddenly, the coaster jolted again, and the figures started to climb towards them. Emily's friends screamed as the shadowy entities drew closer, their skeletal hands reaching out. Emily tried to unbuckle her harness, but it was stuck fast. The figures were almost upon them when, without warning, the coaster surged back to life. The ride plummeted down the track at breakneck speed, the shadowy figures vanishing as quickly as they had appeared. The lights flickered back on, and the ride continued its terrifying course. By the time they reached the station, Emily and her friends were pale and shaken, barely able to comprehend what had just happened. As they stumbled out of their seats, Emily turned to look back at the Widow's Peak. There, in the darkness beneath the tracks, she saw the faint, glowing eyes of the shadowy figures watching them. She knew then that something evil haunted that ride, something that fed on fear and had nearly claimed them as its latest victims. Emily and her friends never spoke of that night again, but the terror of the Widow's Peak stayed with them forever. They never returned to Luna Park, and the ride was quietly closed a few months later after more unexplained incidents. The park officials blamed technical issues, but Emily knew the truth. In the heart of Oakwood Amusement Park stood an old, weathered carousel, long forgotten by the park's visitors. Once a centerpiece of joy and laughter, it had fallen into disrepair over the decades, overshadowed by the newer, flashier rides. The carousel's paint was chipped, its music silent, and the once vibrant animals had taken on a sinister air, their glassy eyes appearing almost lifelike in the fading light. One autumn evening, a group of teenagers decided to explore the park after hours. Among them was Sarah, a curious girl with a fascination for the eerie and abandoned. The group had heard rumors about the old carousel, whispers of it being haunted by the spirits of children who had disappeared at the park long ago. Determined to uncover the truth, they made their way through the shadows to the decrepit ride. As they approached, the air grew colder, and an unsettling silence enveloped them. The only sound was the crunch of fallen leaves underfoot. The group hesitated at the entrance, but Sarah, driven by a mix of bravery and foolishness, stepped forward and climbed onto the platform. She traced her fingers over the peeling paint of a once majestic horse, feeling a strange energy emanating from it. "Let's see if it still works," she said, her voice breaking the silence. She found the old power switch and, with a deep breath, flipped it on. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a creak and a groan, the carousel sputtered to life. The dim lights flickered on, casting eerie shadows, and the old mechanical organ began to play a haunting, off-key tune. The horses began to move, slowly at first, then picking up speed. The group watched in a mixture of awe and fear. Suddenly, the ride seemed to come alive with a malevolent force. The once stationary figures of children began to appear, their ghostly forms riding the carousel animals, their hollow eyes fixed on the intruders. Panic set in as the carousel spun faster and faster, the ghostly children reaching out with spectral hands. Sarah and her friends tried to jump off, but an invisible barrier seemed to hold them in place. The temperature dropped further, and whispers filled the air, telling tales of lost souls and unfinished business. Sarah's mind raced. She remembered the legend. The carousel was said to be cursed by a vengeful spirit of a carnival worker who had lost his own child in a tragic accident on the ride. The spirit trapped the souls of children who ventured too close, condemning them to ride the carousel for eternity. Desperate, Sarah spotted a small, worn-out plaque at the center of the carousel. It bore an inscription: "To free the trapped souls, one must show true remorse and offer a heartfelt apology." Sarah shouted above the din, pleading for forgiveness on behalf of her friends. Tears streamed down her face as she promised they meant no harm, only curiosity. The carousel began to slow. The ghostly children faded, their expressions softening. The ride came to a halt, and the coldness lifted. The invisible barrier vanished, and Sarah and her friends stumbled off, gasping for breath. As they hurried away, Sarah glanced back one last time. The carousel stood silent and still once more, but she could have sworn she saw the faint outline of a man, nodding approvingly before disappearing into the night. They never spoke of their encounter again, but the old carousel remained a chilling reminder of the night they narrowly escaped becoming part of Oakwood Amusement Park's dark history. Thunderclap Mountain was the main attraction at Whispering Pines Amusement Park. Towering above the other rides, it was a massive, wooden roller coaster known for its steep drops and sharp turns. The creaking of its old wooden structure added to the thrill, making it a favorite for adrenaline junkies. Yet, it also had a dark history, a history that many chose to forget. Years ago, during the coaster's inaugural season, a tragic accident occurred. A cart had derailed on the sharpest turn, killing several riders. The park had closed for months, and an investigation ensued. Though the ride eventually reopened, whispers of a haunting persisted. Some claimed that on quiet nights, they could hear the screams of the lost riders echoing through the air. One summer night, a group of college students, eager for a scare, decided to sneak into the park after closing. Among them were Jack, Lily, Mark, and Emma. They had heard the stories about Thunderclap Mountain and wanted to see if the legends were true. Armed with flashlights and a sense of adventure, they made their way to the coaster. The park was eerily silent, the cheerful sounds of daytime replaced by an unsettling stillness. As they approached Thunderclap Mountain, the wooden structure loomed above them like a giant skeleton. Jack, the bravest of the group, led the way, climbing over the locked gate that barred entry to the ride. They made their way to the loading platform, where the coaster cart sat waiting in the dark. Jack suggested they take a ride, and despite their reservations, the others reluctantly agreed. They climbed into the front cart, their flashlights barely piercing the inky blackness. With a bit of effort, Jack managed to get the old coaster moving. The chains clanked as the cart was slowly pulled up the first hill. As they ascended, the air grew colder, and a dense fog began to roll in, obscuring their view. The higher they climbed, the more the atmosphere seemed to change, growing heavier and more oppressive. At the peak, they paused for a moment, the park spread out below them like a dark sea. Then, without warning, the cart plunged down the first drop. The students screamed, partly from fear and partly from excitement. But as they rounded the first sharp turn, they felt a violent jolt, as if something unseen had grabbed the cart. The ride grew wilder and more chaotic. The cart seemed to have a mind of their own, speeding up and slowing down unpredictably. Ghostly figures appeared in the fog, flickering in and out of existence. Lily swore she saw faces in the mist, their eyes wide with terror. As they approached the spot where the fatal accident had occurred, the cart slowed to a crawl. The air grew frigid, and the fog thickened, enveloping them completely. Jack's flashlight flickered and then went out. The others' lights followed suit, plunging them into darkness. In the silence, they heard it, faint whispers, growing louder and more frantic. The temperature continued to drop, and an overwhelming sense of dread filled the air. Suddenly, the cart jerked to a stop. They were trapped on the track, unable to move forward or backward. Panic set in as they tried to free themselves from the restraints. The whispers grew into screams, filling their ears with the sounds of pure terror. The ghostly figures reappeared, closing in on them, their faces twisted in agony. Jack, desperate to escape, reached for the emergency release lever he had seen on the control panel at the loading platform. With a surge of adrenaline, he managed to yank it free. The cart lurched forward, racing through the rest of the ride at breakneck speed. They hurtled through the darkness, the ghostly apparitions chasing them, until finally, they reached the loading platform. The cart screeched to a halt, and the restraints released. The students scrambled out, gasping for breath and shaking with fear. As they stumbled away from the ride, they looked back to see the fog lifting. The roller coaster stood silent and still once more, the ghosts of Thunderclap Mountain seemingly at rest. The students fled the park, vowing never to return. Though they survived their harrowing ordeal, the experience left them with a chilling realization: the spirits of Thunderclap Mountain were very real, and they would forever be haunted by the screams of those who perished on that fateful ride.